And welcome into Poke the Bear, episode 102. Conor, 102. That is Conor Ryan. I'm Evan Marinofsky. Conor, what is up?
Evan, gotta tell you, a little nervous, a little on edge.
Nervous.
We're at kind of that point of the off season where I'm a little weird whenever we set up these podcasts. Not because I'm not excited to talk hockey with you and share our musings with the rest of our loyal listeners, but you're always worried you post a podcast and then a couple minutes later, some news breaks. And I got just a pit in my stomach, I think, right now. We're recording this at 1 p.m. on a Thursday. I feel like something's going to happen. And I feel like we're going to post this. And then tomorrow I'm going to go on YouTube and the comments are going to be like, you idiots, you messed it up again. So I'm a little on edge, Evan. I'm a little need to take a chill pill, I think.
I am as well. But I think I have, we've been doing this for so long at this point that it has happened so many times that at some level it's just like, you try. There's nothing you can do. So we were saying before we came on, so if something gets announced, we're not re-recording this. If something gets announced, because we're going to hit on all the head coaches, but if something does get announced, there will be a video on YouTube, Bruins Rinkside YouTube channel that has our reaction to it. It'll be instant reaction. So it'll actually be better. See, we always look out for you listeners. But this is true. It's that time of year. It's also that time of year where, lack of a better term, shit just happens. Like stuff will just automate. Like all of a sudden you get the 3 tweet notifications and it's Elliot Friedman saying, the Bruins are trading DeBrusque or, so-and-so's coming back or this. It's
Kevin Fiala's going to the Kings. Right?
Yeah.
That was also a hilarious sequence because it was like Elliot Friedman tweeted, I think it was like LA's really in the running for Fiala. And then like 11 seconds later, he's like, oh, they're getting him. I was like, oh, okay.
Something must have changed fast.
Yes.
So we will hit on all the coaches. That's going to be the majority of this episode will be the coaching. And the favorite right now, at least according to most people, the vibe is David Quinn. David Quinn, at least right now, seems to be the favorite. And a lot of people are kind of iffy on this. We talked about this on Bruins Beat on Tuesday where, David Quinn's a good coach. No one's saying he's a bad coach, but it's hard to see the upgrade. It's hard to see the upgrade with Quinn, given his history, given, what he did with the Rangers. It's been a few days now. Has anything changed with you on David Quinn?
I mean, I look at it with David Quinn as a situation where I think when you first look at the potential hiring of him, the first thing you obviously look at is his time in New York, which didn't go so well. Some younger players, I think people were disappointed, didn't take big steps forward, which you look at a guy like Kakko or a guy like Lafreniere, valid, but also they didn't really take huge strides with Gallant too. It's one thing
they were third line players.
Exactly. Yeah. You could look at, let's say, Adam Fox or Ryan Lindgren or those guys and plenty of success stories there. But then you just look at his overall, the fact that the Rangers kind of struggled to have an identity. Some guys underwhelmed during that time when he was the head coach there. I could see why people would be hesitant or at least not be excited. I feel like if they announce David Quinn as coach, there's going to be a lot of people that aren't going to be punching holes in the wall, I would hope. Please don't do that.
Don't do that.
Yeah, but there'll be at least people who are like, oh, okay, yeah. Which I view it as, I think when you look at Quinn's appeal, you have to look at it from the Bruins perspective, which, again, who knows if what they're looking for is the right move for, what the next steps of this franchise has to be. But at the very least, Quinn, one, checks off the boxes of being at least an experienced NHL head coach. And two, it's the fact that he's a guy that at least offers a different dynamic from Cassidy, right? Whereas Cassidy was probably a little bit more demanding, maybe, blunt in terms of his delivery of especially with younger players. Quinn's kind of, I think, known more as a guy that's hops more on, positive, encouraging, those kind of things. And again, he had to have been. Like, you look at those Rangers teams, I want to say like the first year he was head coach, their average age was like 23.6. It was something crazy like that where they had so many younger players. So
a team full of kids my age.
Yes, exactly. So he's definitely more, I think, versed in dealing with those rosters. Obviously, he had very high marks from Grzelcyk and McAvoy during their time at BU. So I look at that, and we have to give a shout out to Ty Anderson because he got he listened to a podcast. I think it was the Cam and Strick podcast with Quinn. And you kind of listen about David Quinn reflecting on his time in New York and kind of what he views kind of the hallmarks of a team that he coaches. And a lot of it is, not east-west, a lot north-south efforts, second chances, stuff like that he wants his team to be playing at. You're going to hear those buzzwords or how he kind of presents himself. And you could view from like the Bruins perspective, like an interview with him and being like, this is kind of what we're looking for in terms of what he preaches. Now, does it get laid out in terms of how it is on the ice? That remains to be seen. But I think if you view it from the Bruins perspective, it at least kind of makes sense as to what they're looking for in terms of an experienced NHL coach, but a bit of a departure from what you saw with Bruce Cassidy.
And it's funny, pendulums always swing, right? When teams have one thing, they're looking for another. When they get that thing and lose a little bit of another, they go look at that. How teams, who need, the Bruins need centers right now. You're going to see them probably draft a lot of centers the next coming years, and they might need defense. They might need left wings, and who knows? But it's the same with head coaching in the sense that Cassidy's one area that I think ultimately got him fired was they didn't like how he handled your younger guys, like a Jake DeBrusk or a Trent Frederick or a Jack Studnicka. Now we've sat here and we've discussed at length about how we don't really feel that those guys are worthy of firing a head coach over, especially a really good head coach. But David Quinn, I think, would be someone who could come in and give a different voice to those guys. And maybe that's where the Bruins look at and say, okay, he's a better voice for those kinds of players. Because as I mentioned on Bruins Beat on Tuesday, I wouldn't be surprised if they go into next season with a third and fourth line that is made primarily of guys in their own system. Not so much, again, I don't know how you get out of the cap constraints that you put yourself in, but, do you have a third line of something with like Steen, Mark McLaughlin, Trent Frederick, so you're going to have those guys going in. Maybe that's why they want a guy like David Quinn, because he might be better for those kinds of guys. Another name that's popped up recently is Mike Vellucci from Pittsburgh. He's currently an assistant with them. Never been an NHL head coach. He's won at every level. A lot of these coaches, by the way, have won at every level. That's how they get to the NHL. It's a valid
pretty good
point.
Correlation.
Yeah,
right?
you don't lose in the OHL and like, come on up and be an NHL head coach. But he did win a Calder Cup with the Charlotte Checkers, I believe. He's 55, so he's David Quinn's age. And I don't think people know a ton about him. But I'm not dying for him as the stuff that I've seen. I think he'd be fine. But what is your reaction to a guy like Vellucci being in the mix?
Yeah, again, as you said, I don't think he's a guy that's going to be stealing headlines. And again, we cover hockey for a living, but I also don't think we have an encyclopedia of these guys in terms of what their X's and O's are. So
Mike Vellucci files.
I don't know what a typical Mike Vellucci coach team is like per se, but you kind of look at his track record, his resume, his impact on kind of wherever he's gone in his coaching career. It's pretty evident, right? Like you look at Carolina, yes, he helped lead their AHL team to a Calder Cup, but he was also, I believe, their director of development of player development from 2014 to 2019. You look at the Carolina team, right? Like how much have they been helped over the years by younger players coming through the system, developing there and being key cogs?
Does he want to be the GM here?
Could also help there. So you look at that situation where the imprint he had on that Carolina team that's obviously paying dividends now. But then you look at where he was the last couple of years on Mike Sullivan's staff in Pittsburgh, and he primarily worked with the forwards and I believe the penalty kill there. And if there's one thing we've noticed from Pittsburgh over the last couple of years now, it's every year they sign like these forwards on like the bargain bin or these random guys. Like these guys, okay. Like you see how he is in training camp and he works out and they score 20 goals and give you like 35, 40 points every year. It helps when you have guys like Crosby, obviously as key cogs in your lineup, but how many times have we seen Dan Heinen this year, Evan Rodriguez? Yes. We see it all the time. So
Nick Bonino, I know it was before Vellucci, but Nick Bonino was a good example.
Yes. So I think you kind of look at Vellucci and his track record everywhere he's gone, and it's encouraging, right? It's better than a tired retread of like Rick Bowness or like, Tortorella or anything like this. Like, again, Vellucci's not a guy that springs to mind when you look at guys, but you look at him, you look at some of the other guys we've mentioned that have been in the mix before that maybe are out of the running, but it's all guys who have built a track record focused on development, AHL work, working with prospects, and guys that, again, have had a pretty good track record wherever they've gone. So is Vellucci the favorite? probably right now I wouldn't say so, but he's definitely in the mix. And if they hired him, it doesn't take a whole lot of work to look into his resume and see where, why he would be fitting for a head coaching job somewhere.
Yeah, and again, we've talked this entire time since Cassidy got fired about kind of hiring someone outside the box in a sense.
Yeah.
And I know he's an assistant, so it's hard to categorize him as that. But I mean, if he basically has the same resume-ish as like a Spencer Carberry, and we've regarded Spencer Carberry as someone who has kind of an outside the box pick. So maybe Vellucci would be an outside the box guy. And again, I kind of almost look at it as a little bit of a bold move. Like I don't look at Quinn as a bold move at all. I look at Vellucci as somewhat of a bold move. He's never been an NHL head coach before. Now, Dave Lewis had never been an NHL head coach before, I don't believe. Or he'd been an interim with Detroit. I don't even remember. We don't need to look this up. But I don't believe he was. Again, I'm not comparing Vellucci to Dave Lewis. But I do think that it would be a little bit of a bolder pick than a David Quinn. Before we get to the next big head coach, the big head coach in the running, Jim Montgomery has been very in the mix for this Bruins head coaching job. And I think that's the people's favorite. I think that's most people who say, okay, yeah, that's the guy you want out of the crew that has been put forward. Now, again, he's in the mix for Winnipeg too. So there's not much you can do if he goes to Winnipeg and it's like, well, he chose Winnipeg over Boston.
I mean, if you want to go to Winnipeg over Boston, yeah, have fun, pal.
That is like quite the interesting move if that was the case. But if they pass on him, I think people are going to be really disappointed because Jim Montgomery is the guy who has won everywhere he's gone. You look at his track record at Denver, even before that, obviously with Dallas, again, like he got fired there. He had to go into rehab. For everything I've read, I believe he's been sober since. He seems all fine. There was a story in the Dallas Morning News from March of 2020 where he'd been 90 days sober at that point and said he was doing great and wanted to get right back into coaching. His wife said the same thing. And he's been an assistant in St. Louis ever since, or at least since September of 2020. So that's the guy who I think you want. That's the guy who I think would make sense for this roster. Players like playing for him. That's a guy who I think you want, just given everything about him, the winning, especially at Denver. Maybe I'm just partial to college hockey. I think you might be too, but to me, I think that feels like the guy. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think he's one of the guys where I think you look at, let's say, Quinn or Vellucci or any of these guys, you make the arguments for like the pros and cons, or a lot of it's, well, he could work here, but there's this one like aspect that we're kind of shaky on. Montgomery, you kind of look at, as you said, his track record of being a coach in the NHL, the systems that he's put in place, which I know a lot of the players in Dallas really like, that it's not really emphasizing, dump and chase or simplify, but a lot of just reading and reacting to the defense in front of you and kind of giving guys more opportunity to, generate those scoring chances on their own. So I think you look at the systems that he's put in place, the fact that, as you said, I think a lot of players like playing for him, veterans too. So he kind of fits everything that you're kind of looking for a Bruins team that, yes, wants to incorporate young talent. Yes, wants a new voice, but if Patrice Bergeron's back, they're also going to be trying to compete, right? Like this isn't a coach you hire for a rebuild, because that doesn't seem to be what the Bruins are going to do. So if you're looking for someone that at least checks off all the boxes, he makes a lot of sense, because you even look at his time on St. Louis and Craig Berube's staff. I think he's handled a lot of their special teams, both the power play and penalty kill. Both have been, I think, top 10 and maybe even top 5 last couple of years. So even during his time at Denver, he's always known for a guy that has good systems, guys start on time, detail oriented. So put it all together, it makes a lot of sense. Like, is he offered the highest ceiling? That remains to be seen, right? There's also a lot of younger coaches that we've talked about before that might offer a different dynamic, different look. But in terms of just making sense for right now of what this Bruins team that's kind of in this crossroads of what they want to be, but want to try to contend, I think Montgomery does make plenty of sense in that regard.
It's both a safe pick and a smart pick, because it can work out really well. And if you rebuild or retool, he's the right guy. If you want to win, he's the right guy. Because I believe in his first year in Dallas, they were really good. I think they kind of lost in the second round. I think that was the team that lost to the Blues in the 2019 playoffs.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes. Pat Maroon scored the
Yeah.
Game 7 goal, right? Yeah. And that's also, I didn't touch on it too, but the fact that I know that run they went on in 2020 in the bubble, a lot of it was younger players, taking big steps forward when Rick Bowness was the coach. But I think you also saw a lot of those guys first get their feet wet with Montgomery as their coach too. So obviously Heiskanen was already on a pretty upward trajectory, but you look at like Hintz or Gurianov or any of these other guys, a lot of them first started getting those.
Was Robertson in the mix in 2020? I forget.
Don't know if he was there like with Montgomery. I don't know for sure, but I know there was plenty of those other guys that, we've talked about before for Dallas that if they weren't setting out and having established roles by that time, they were starting to carve out those minutes under Montgomery, which at least is encouraging that I think he gave some of those younger players the rope to kind of learn, fail, and obviously eventually thrive at the NHL level.
So we talk about these three coaches, and the one obviously who's been getting the most public resistance to is like a David Quinn. Even though it's funny is he's like a local. He's like, he would fit in probably the best with Bostonians if they were out, at a bar or something. But people are against it. Are people not giving Quinn enough of a chance? Like, is he coming in? Because Bruce Cassidy came in, and I granted he'd had that bad time in Washington that I remember people referencing, but people were kind of like, oh, he came from Providence. Like, all right, like, sure. Quinn seems as more angst against. Are people not giving him enough of a chance?
Yeah, I definitely think there's probably some people who are quick to automatically assume that the same guy who led a rebuilding Rangers roster is going to have the same results here. Again, I think it's all about giving guys also second chances. I mean, it's the same thing with Montgomery too, who, as you said, seems to be healthy, sober, which fantastic and all that stuff. So, but Quinn, just because he had some struggles with a Rangers team that one was inconsistent in terms of their production on the ice, but also the team that didn't have the size and the strength to handle Tom Wilson, and then they just imploded. Like the entire team imploded as well in terms of
the Rangers just
management,
in
front
like
office.
3 days.
Yes, exactly. Like Tom Wilson broke an original 6 franchise. So
did Tim Schaller for that matter.
That is also true. So you look at that, you look at kind of the inconsistency they were already dealt with. And also I think people point to the fact that the Rangers took a big step forward this year under Gallant. I'm also going to say that I think a lot of it was the fact that Igor Shesterkin went sicko mode because the Rangers were honestly butt this entire year at 5-on-5 play. And Shesterkin, again, just went nuts. Like that.
And defensively, they were awful in the postseason.
Yeah, they were terrible. So I think having a year that Shesterkin has kind of masks just kind of the strides they made this past season. I think you look at Quinn and you listen to what he talked about, like on the Cam and Strickland podcast, about what he wants the identity of his team to be, and whether or not the personnel that he had with the Rangers kind of met the vision that he wants. Right. It's kind of the same with Cassidy, who had a vision of when he first got here of a roster that's better at transitioning the puck, of playing with pace, all these things. And you could make the argument they still didn't kind of give him what he wanted by the end of his time here, but he at least changed that identity and changed with the pieces he had to work with. So if Quinn gets here and it's about second effort and they have, guys that buy into his system and it leads to more drives to the net front, more shots from grade A ice, it's these things that we talk about time and time again that are the simple plays that lead to more high danger scoring chances, more secondary scoring. So put him here, it could work. Again, I don't know if he's the favorite in terms of maybe if you map out what the best path is for this team. I don't know if he fits the bill there, but I also don't think he's going to get in here and it's going to be the same results as a Rangers team that was far younger, far less experienced than what this Bruins team is if he walks into the room.
I also think we have to remember that the Bruins are entering this year down important players. You're without McAvoy and Marchand and Grzelcyk. Like, you're out of guys that are part of basically your core. So it's going to be tough for any head coach, I think, to come in here. And, if they struggle at the start, first couple months of the season, unless it's obviously on the head coach, I don't think you can pin it on the head coach. I don't. And I think if Quinn comes in here and they are 500 through 2 months, obviously people are going to be pissed, Bruins fans, and it makes sense. They expect a lot. I get it. I respect it. But I think a lot of the heat's going to be on Quinn at the time. And I don't think it should be, if that time actually comes, that actually happens. So again, not being dealt a great hand either for whatever coach comes in here, because you're going to have younger guys who've underperformed tremendously. You're given, an injured roster, a cap constrained roster, like we're going to get to this in a second, but they got to find a second line center. You have Eric Holla, but do you want to enter the season with that? Like right now you got just over $2 million in cap space. You got to re-sign Bergeron. You don't have a lot. Sweeney's going to have to really do some cap gymnastics, so to speak, to make this whole thing work. So, and we'll get to that right now with the second line center thing. So Kevin Weeks actually tweeted out on Thursday something about David Krejci. He said, and I'm pulling up the tweet right now. He said, keep an eye on, I'm told David Krejci is currently spending part of his summer in South Carolina with the injuries and new head coach soon for the Bruins. Is there a chance he makes a return to the Bees this season? Now I'm disappointed. Kevin Weeks did not announce this or say this, like driving in a convertible, flying down like the freeway. I needed that. A simple tweet doesn't do it. Maybe that's for the actual news that actually happens.
Yes.
But it should be noted, Krejci spends most, if not every summer in South Carolina, has a house down there. Great place. I've never been, but it seems like a nice place.
Lovely place.
But the more I think about the ideal second line center for next season, I look at how cap constrained they are. And they, again, Nazem Kadri's going to cost a lot. Vinny Trocheck's going to cost a lot. Do you want to, both those guys are not getting any younger. It's kind of the same thing with re-signing Torrey Krug, except Krug was actually younger. I know it's different positions, but it was all about, hey, by year 4 or 5 of that might not look too great. Kadri and Trocheck could look bad by year 3, even given their age and how much Kadri overperformed where he normally performs this past season. And I keep looking at Krejci, and I know he's not the same guy. And I want this team to ideally, in a perfect world, retool. But Bergeron is coming back. And again, I don't love the idea of running it back for the freaking 4th year in a row, but you don't have really any other options unless you get uber creative, because Andrew Kopp's going to cost a lot of money now. And I don't think the Rangers is going to let him just go. So what do you think is the right solution at second line center?
Yeah, I think it's all about just how you define the candidates, right? Because I think if you asked me the ideal 2C for this team, that's within reason, right? We could talk about they want Pierre-Luc Dubois or someone they have to trade for. Yeah, no crap. You want a 23-year-old top line center for now and for the future. Ideal, I would still look at a guy like Kadri as being kind of what you need in terms of that 2C role. Not only the fact that he's a guy that can finish plays and can score goals, which is what you desperately need, but also you look at what Cam Neely talked about during his press conference, his last one, whereas getting inside the dots, being tougher to play against. Again, Kadri's not a guy that's going to be bowling over guys, but he's a pain in the ass. And definitely very effective. I think Bruins fans are well aware of that. Very effective.
I saw some Bruins fans resisting the idea because they didn't like him. And it's like, if he was on your team, you would like him. You would love him.
Exactly.
Same with Tom Wilson. It's how other teams view Marchand. That's how that works.
Yeah. So I view Kadri as being the ideal candidate for this team, especially, again, people are very worried about how, he's 32, giving a big contract to a guy like that. Very valid. But you know what? They're running it back. So they're looking short term now. We could talk about this a few years from now and be like, that was a dumb call. Probably in 4 or 5 years. Yeah, it's going to look pretty bad, but they don't give a shit about that right now. So definitely Kadri is, I think, the ideal candidate. Now, the pragmatic one, though, I think is Krejci, because as you said, it's the cap savings there. And who knows what a Krejci contract would be. I have to imagine it's not breaking the bank. So if you're the Bruins and you're able to sign him for a cheaper deal, and again, as you said, Krejci's a couple years older. He spent a year beating down on plumbers, farmers. I don't know who plays in the Czech league, but the level of competition is not as high. But I don't know. You give David Krejci, who's a guy that also his style of play and his skill set isn't something that really erodes with age. Really, he's not a guy that's relied on his speed or his shot or anything like that. It's controlling the puck, playmaking, those things like that. And if you give him a line with Taylor Hall that he's played well with before and David Pastrnak, pretty good. It's at the very least, especially for a guy who's not, I don't think, going to cost you $5 million plus, right? I don't think it's going to be something like that. So it's all about, for the Bruins thing, just being pragmatic of what's the best fit. Because let's face it, even if you get Bergeron and Krejci back, you can make the argument you still got to make a few more moves, right? And you're already going to have to clear out some cap space. We know that. But if instead of spending $7.5 million on a guy like Kadri, and you save $3 million, 3.5 chunk of that off of just saving on a Krejci deal. Put that towards Mason Marchment, put it towards Nick Paul, put it towards someone that you can put in the bottom six that can give you a different dynamic, or another defenseman or anything like that. So
or re-sign Nick Foligno to a longer, more expensive
of course,
deal.
yes, something like that. So yeah, I think Kadri, would fit with this team in terms of, again, answering what they kind of need in that 2C spot. But David Krejci is not, I wouldn't call him a consolation prize, because he's still an impact player, I think, especially if you put him around that supporting cast. And if he's able to allow you a little bit more freedom to add another piece or two to this team, that might be worth more than maybe what a guy like Kadri could give you in the short term in terms of just a 30 goal scorer in that spot.
I still just wonder about the future at that position for them, because I think even if you go out and get Kadri, I have a tough time believing Kadri is your future number one center. He's going to be paid like it, but do you trust that he can be a number one center for, the next 5 years? I don't know. Like, that's sort of the issue. Is I think most people would be more apt to want to see them build at center through the draft, through the prospect pool, right? Like, that I think is a little bit safer and more proven that actually works. You see that with every good team. Typically those guys are coming from your system. It's hard to just go out, pick a guy off free agency, and suddenly they're part of the core. So even with Krejci, by the way, too, even if you go out and get Krejci, like, you're just delaying the inevitable. And if you get Krejci and Bergeron is coming back, they're not rebuilding or retooling. I mentioned trading Taylor Hall, right? Get, probably a high first round pick for him. And maybe you do that next off season after the 1 year of Krejci and Bergeron is up, and then you start to retool. But I just keep looking at that 2023 draft, and it's like, that seems like the one. Like, that's where you build. But who knows? Again, if they open this season with Bergeron and Krejci down the middle and the normal cast of characters as wings, maybe even a Fabian Lysell somewhere in there, and you can make the third and fourth lines work. I mean, again, we've said this so many times before, but they're still a playoff team. Like, unless the Flyers jump up a ton with Tortorella, they're still a playoff team probably. And the Penguins' future is a little bit in jeopardy, and the Caps. And so, like, they look at it like they're still a playoff team. So who knows? It's going to be interesting either way, but obviously first on the docket is whoever becomes the next head coach. That's the big item. So hopefully it doesn't come out before this drops, but I have a weird feeling that it may have.
Yeah.
May have. Anyways, Connor, what will not change is what people can look forward to from you over at BSJ.
Yes, we'll have all your coverage for whenever the Bruins announce their new head coach, along with all the news of Patrice Bergeron free agency, which is also right around the corner. We've got the draft coming up next week, so we'll start doing a primer for that in terms of potential targets they have in the second round. Could they trade into the first round? We'll cover all that stuff over at bostonsportsjournal.com. So please subscribe over at BSJ. If you want to follow me on Twitter, you can do that at Conor Ryan _93.
Go do all that. That's Conor Ryan. I'm Marinofsky. Bear listeners, have a great rest of your day.